Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to continue our work on the dedication sign that we're making. In the previous episode we routed out all the individual letters. Today we're doing the main backer piece that those letters are going to get attached to. Before we can attach the letters, I needed to clean that little bit of flashing off the back of each one. I started with a curved back file and that seemed to go pretty quick. I thought there's got to be a faster way. So here I am trying to do the same cleaning operation on a 1-inch belt sander, and that worked pretty well. In the end, no one way was faster than the other. Here's the look we're going for, with the exception of the broken E. That little pause was me saying bad words. If you watch real closely in the previous video, you can actually see me recut that E in an area of scrap. Here I'm working on cutting down the gray, which is the back of the sign. I'd already split off an 18-inch section, which will be the main body, and this is the remainder. My first cut, I tipped the table saw to kind of an arbitrary angle to make the French cleat, and here I'm setting it back to 90, where I will split the remainder, creating not only the mating piece for the French cleat, but a leftover that we're going to use for spacers in a little bit. I've moved out to the West Bay where I'm working on polishing the surface to the finish that I was after. Initially, I was after kind of a gloss. I wanted something more than a countertop matte. So I started with hitting it with a gray Scotch-Brite pad, and then because it's what I had, I moved on to using automotive polishes, went through a series of grits, and got a fairly decent shine. But with gloss comes all the imperfections. And what I uncovered was something that I hadn't seen in all my handling of this material, and that was some manufacturing defects that in the end I had to sand the whole thing down and decided, you know what, I'm going to end with matte. To create a nice matte finish in a solid surface material, you sand down through some grits, ending at about 400 or 500, and then using a burgundy or a red Scotch-Brite followed by a gray Scotch-Brite, you get a nice finish. So that's what I left it with. So here I am bringing the piece back into the shop, and the first thing you notice is it's bigger than the machine. The cutting surface on my machine is 4 foot by 4 foot, and this piece is 6 feet long. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm marking the center point along what will be the y-axis. That point, along with the edge of the material, is going to become my origin. The next thing I'm doing is I'm pushing it up against a set of dowel pins that I used the machine to cut in, and they become essentially a fence along which I can slide the piece without changing my X0. So I've marked Y0 with the piece of tape, and X0 will remain that left-hand side of the material that I can relocate along the dowel pins. I cut the dowel pins using the machine itself so I know they're in line with the Y-axis. Once I had the home position set, I used Mach 3 to jog around, and in Mach 3, as you move the head, the XY line moves with it, and I could see that the cutting was going to fall in the appropriate place on the piece of material. At that point, I hit cycle start and relief carved the first half of the text. With that half done, I cleaned everything off, released the clamps, and you'll see me slide the piece down. Now with it slid down and reclamped, I reset to that same Y0 and left everything else alone. I loaded the next job. I loaded the next tool path in Mach 3, did the same check to make sure things were laying out where they needed to be, and proceeded to relief carve the second half. Here I'm doing a tool change, switching from an 1/8 down to a 1/16 inch diameter cutter just to get in some of the real tight corners. Setting up this tool path was super easy. In Fusion 360 I just used the rest machining option and told it I had a smaller cutter. It went around and picked out the little places to fix. So the next thing I did was attach all the pieces to the back of the sign. I'd already attached the half of the French cleat to the back, and here I'm cutting some of the remaining pieces for spacer scraps. I'll bring the sign over, lay it down. You can see the other piece is already glued on. It's just glued on with a clear, pure silicone. I wipe everything down with alcohol real good. Squirt a little thin layer, doesn't take a whole lot, and put these on with some weights and let them dry overnight. With the back of the sign all dry, I've now flipped it over one last time, and here I'm beginning to mask off all the letters. They're going to be painted a dark gray, not a black. There was too much contrast in that, so I went with a dark charcoal gray. I've masked it all off good, and I'm hitting it with some rattle cans every different direction to make sure that the sides of the relief carving were all covered. So with the paint dry and the masking removed, I went through the process of starting to remove the overspray. I started with a card scraper, but this was a little brutal on the sharp edges. So I went over the whole thing to some degree and then wound up finishing with a sander. The problem here was I had to sand the entire board again, which in reality was not that big a deal, but I did wind up sanding the whole board again to keep the sheen the same. So for what seemed like about the 23rd time, I finished sanding and then went back through a couple grits of Scotch-Brite, and it looked good. So in the end, I would do it this way basically from the start. I wouldn't use a card scraper at all. So we're down to the last step in building the sign, and this was the part that made me the most nervous. This is the part where I had to lay out each individual letter on the sign and make it look uniform and straight. And these were letters that had some flow to them, and you'll see that. So I spent a lot of painstaking time doing layout lines and getting everything just right. And you can see I've set my laptop there. What I have on my laptop is my Fusion 360 drawing of this sign. And then I was using the measuring tool and taking measurements as to where certain spots in the letters fell. If you've got a good eye for laying things out straight, you might not go through this level of hassle. But, you know, when Jimmy says if it looks straight, it is straight, not for me, it's not. Once I had a letter laid out where I wanted it, I had to be able to pick it up and put it back down after I glued it. So I used little pieces of tape with pencil hash marks to mark certain points, so I knew I could pick the letter up, put glue on it or silicone like I'm doing here, and set it back down in exactly the same spot. This worked real well, and I just repeated this process through the rest of the sign. Just like with the spacers on the back, it only takes a real thin layer of silicone to really attach solid surface material to itself. In doing the layout, I also noticed that this font had a consistent angle to all the letters, and I forget what it was now, but I set that little clear protractor to that angle and used it to help reference the different letters. The C's happened to be kind of rough because there was no straight or relatively straight edge to start with. So basically rinse and repeat through all of the letters. This didn't take as long as I thought it was going to, and once I got in the groove, I went right through it. A couple of letters I was able to do at the same time because they had a common bottom. With the letters left to dry overnight, I came back the next morning and pulled off all the little pieces of marker tape. And then corian is easy enough to write on with pencil, and it comes off just as easy with alcohol. So I go along here and wipe off all my layout lines and everything. They come off with no issue, leave no marks. So there it is, all completed. I'm trying to get a camera angle here that shows the different elevations between the relief carving and the applied letters, but it turned out super cool. Here's a little clip of when we hung the sign. You can see the French cleat on the wall, and the wires are because at the last minute I decided to go the extra mile and we put LED backlighting on it. Well, there it is. I hope you've enjoyed this last couple of videos. Maybe you've had some ideas or seen something that will inspire you to use corian in a way other than your traditional countertop. If you're so inclined, click the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't. Don't forget the little bell, that'll get you the notifications when the next videos come out. If you're just browsing around YouTube and you want to try another channel, I'm going to put a link in the description below. Channel I stumbled into the other day. Guy does some fun projects, some interesting projects, and his videos are very well edited, everything I wish mine were. Give him a check out. I want to give him a little plug right here, and maybe you guys will find something interesting there as well. Thanks for stopping by the shop, or in this case the conference room, and I'll see you next time.